The cold seeps into my bones, deeper than the air outside, deeper than the concrete floor beneath my thin soles. It's coming from the screen, from the pixels glowing with manufactured rage. They call me a fraud, a liar, a parasite. Each word is a needle pricking my skin, then sinking in slow, twisting. The phone is heavy in my hand, vibrating with notification after notification, each one a fresh accusation, a public stoning happening in real time. My name, once a quiet hum of respect in certain circles, is now a siren wailing, drawing wolves to the feast. My breath hitches. This wasn't a bad review. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This is a dismantling, a purposeful, brutal demolition of everything I've built. The air in the room is thick, suddenly hard to breathe. It smells like dust and ozone and the metallic tang of fear. My own fear. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is when you hear this. If you've ever felt like the world was turning against you, please tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Just a few months ago, my life felt like a painting I'd carefully curated. The strokes were clean, the colors vibrant. I had a career I'd poured my soul into, one that demanded everything but gave back purpose and a quiet sense of achievement. I advised companies, large and small, on navigating complex issues, on building trust when everything was crumbling around them. Irony, I know. I was the crisis manager, the reputation doctor, the one you called when the wolves were at your door. My husband, Mark, was a cornerstone of that painting. He was the frame, solid and seemingly dependable. Successful in his own right, a high-flying executive. We had the loft apartment with the impossible views, the infrequent but perfectly curated dinner parties, the shared history that felt like an anchor in the sometimes turbulent seas of our professional lives. It wasn't a passionate romance novel, not full of grand gestures and sweeping declarations. It was comfortable, companionable, built on mutual respect and shared ambition, or so I thought. We were partners, a unit. We navigated the city, our careers, our lives, side by side. There was a rhythm to it, a predictable flow that felt safe. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, my confidant, my home. The disruption started subtly. A misplaced file, a missed email I was certain I'd sent, a client asking about a conversation we hadn't had. Tiny cracks in the foundation, barely noticeable at first. I brushed them off as stress, my own oversight, the usual chaos of a busy work life. But they kept coming, each one a small, sharp stone dropped into the still water of my life, sending out ripples of unease. Then came the public whispers. An anonymous blog post, couched in concern, asking questions about my methods, my ethics. It was vague, insidious. It didn't accuse directly, not at first. It just raised possibilities, floated doubts. Like a poison mist creeping under the door. I felt a prickle of alarm, but I was used to navigating difficult situations online. This was my job. I drafted a calm, measured response, addressed the vague points with facts, reiterated my commitment to integrity. I felt confident. I had nothing to hide. But the mist thickened. Suddenly, social media accounts I'd never seen before were amplifying the whispers. Comments appeared on articles about my work, on my company's profiles. They were coordinated, repetitive. The language escalated. Doubt turned into accusation. The blog post, initially anonymous, was suddenly linked to names, albeit fake ones. The narrative solidified. I wasn't just questioned, I was being painted as a fraud. A cheat. Someone who used manipulative tactics, who cared only for money, who destroyed lives rather than helped them. It was a mirror image, a perversion of my actual work, a grotesque distortion of my professional self. The initial struggle was against the invisible enemy.
Who was doing this? Why?
My first instinct was crisis management mode. Identify the source, understand the motive, counter the narrative. But the source was shrouded, multifaceted, like trying to catch smoke. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. My expertise was in fixing other people's crises. When it was my own, the ground felt unstable. I tried to reach out to colleagues, to friends in the industry. Some offered cautious support, others seemed hesitant. Like the mud was starting to stick, and they didn't want to get too close. A few key clients called, their voices tight with concern, asking questions I couldn't fully answer because I didn't understand myself. The foundation was cracking faster now. The challenges rose like a tide. The online attacks became more aggressive, more personal. They dug into my past, twisted innocent events into nefarious deeds. My family was mentioned. Details about my life that only someone close would know started appearing, distorted and weaponized. That's when the cold dread truly set in. This wasn't just a random attack. This was personal. Someone who knew me was orchestrating this. The thought was sickening. It wrapped around my chest, a tightening band of anxiety. My sleep evaporated. Food tasted like ash. I walked through my days feeling like a ghost, haunted by the digital whispers that followed me everywhere. Then came the phone call that shattered the remaining pieces of my life. It was a trusted colleague, hesitant, his voice low. He'd heard things. From Mark's circle. Rumors. Whispers that Mark himself was concerned about my stability. That he was worried about my professional conduct. That he felt responsible for some of my recent missteps. My blood ran cold. Concerned? Responsible? It was a carefully constructed narrative, one designed to protect him, to distance himself, to imply I was the problem. The dots connected with a horrifying click.
Mark. He was the source.
He was behind the cancellation. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My husband. The man I trusted. The man I shared my life with. He was systematically destroying me. The pain was a physical blow. It doubled me over, a sharp, agonizing ache in my gut. Betrayal on this scale wasn't just emotional. It felt like a violation at a cellular level.
Why?
Why would he do this? What could possibly drive him to demolish the person he supposedly loved? I replayed everything in my mind. His late nights. The hush phone calls. The subtle distance that had grown between us like a creeping vine. I'd attributed it to work stress, to the demands of his high-pressure job. How blind could I have been? The deepening crisis was no longer just professional, it was existential. My marriage was a lie. My husband was an enemy. My life, the painting I'd so carefully crafted, was burning down around me. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of lies. My reputation was in tatters, my livelihood hanging by a thread. The emotional weight was crushing. I barely recognized myself in the mirror, hollow eyes, a gaunt face, a haunted expression. All seemed truly lost. I sat in the ruins of my life, the digital firestorm raging outside, and felt a profound, terrifying emptiness. Then something shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of strength, more like a slow, cold crystallizing of resolve. The emptiness was still there, but beneath it, a hard, sharp core began to form. The pain hadn't broken me. It had honed me. I looked at the screen, at the hateful comments, at the lies spun by my own husband, and a different feeling emerged. Not sadness, not fear. Cold, quiet rage. He wanted to bury me? To erase me? To use my destruction as a shield for whatever secrets he was hiding?
Fine.
But I wouldn't go down quietly. I wouldn't just fade away. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about survival. This was about justice. This was about making him pay for every lie, every betrayal, every single moment of pain he had inflicted. The turning point was quiet, internal. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper. A promise I made to myself in the deepest, darkest corner of my heart. He fired the first shot, but I would fire the last. I stopped feeling like a victim being canceled and started feeling like a general planning a war. My focus narrowed. If Mark was doing this, he had a reason. A big one. And the most common reason for a man like Mark to risk everything, including his marriage and reputation, was another woman. Or something tied to her. A secret. A financial entanglement. Something he needed to hide, and hiding it required silencing me, discrediting me. I needed to find the source of his panic. The woman. My new mission wasn't just defense. It was investigation. I started digging, quietly, systematically. I wasn't looking for emotional closure or an explanation from him. I was looking for leverage.
For truth.
It wasn't easy. Mark was careful. He compartmentalized. But years of living with someone gives you an innate understanding of their patterns, their tells, their vulnerabilities. I started with his phone records, the subtle shifts in his schedule I'd previously ignored. I cross-referenced dates, times, locations. The digital breadcrumbs were faint, scattered, but they were there. A name started appearing with increasing frequency in burner phone records he thought he'd deleted. A woman named Sarah. An artist I discovered with a little online sleuthing. Someone who lived in a different part of the city, moved in different circles. The idea was risky, maybe insane. I needed to understand Sarah. Was she a willing participant in his scheme? A co-conspirator? Or another victim? I found her online presence, vibrant, raw, full of her art and her thoughts. She seemed real. Not like the calculated figures Mark usually associated with. My initial thought was to use her against him, to threaten to expose their affair unless he stopped. But that felt small. And it still left me vulnerable. What if she was as ruthless as him? I watched her social media from a distance for weeks. Her art was powerful, full of emotion. Her captions were insightful, sometimes melancholic. She posted about feeling lost, about seeking authenticity. There was a vulnerability there that Mark would never understand, never appreciate. He saw people as transactions, as pieces on a chessboard. It became clear she wasn't his equal partner. She was likely another possession, another secret he managed. The idea solidified. What if I approached her? Not as the wronged wife, but as something else. Someone who understood Mark's manipulative nature better than anyone. The act of reaching out felt like stepping off a cliff. I crafted a careful message, oblique but pointed. I didn't mention Mark by name immediately. I spoke about betrayal, about men who build empires on lies, about collateral damage. I mentioned her art, her vulnerability, the sense I got that she, too, was searching for truth. It was a gamble. She could ignore it. She could tell Mark. She could lash out. Her reply came 2 days later. It was short, guarded, asking who I was, why I was contacting her. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The point of no return. I decided on honesty, or at least my version of it. I told her who I was. Mark's wife. I didn't accuse her. I didn't blame her for the affair. I laid out, calmly and factually, what Mark was doing to me. The cancellation campaign. The destruction of my career. The lies. I didn't ask for help. I just told her the truth about the man she was involved with. I told her that I suspected she might not know the full extent of who he was, how easily he could turn on someone he claimed to care about. And then I waited. Days bled into a week. Silence. I assumed I'd made a terrible mistake. That she'd gone straight to Mark, that the attacks would escalate, that this was the final nail in my coffin. The weight of the deepening crisis pressed down harder than ever. My remaining clients were hesitant. My professional network was shrinking. Mark, meanwhile, was putting on a masterful performance of the concerned, separating husband, subtly blaming my instability for the split and my professional woes. He was winning. The emptiness returned, threatening to consume me entirely. I stood on the precipice, the wind of his lies whipping around me, ready to fall into the abyss. But I remembered the cold resolve, the promise I'd made to myself. Not yet. Not while I could still breathe. Then a notification. A message from Sarah. This one was longer.
Raw.
Emotional. She wrote about her own doubts, the inconsistencies in Mark's stories, the little red flags she'd tried to ignore. She saw her own vulnerability reflected in the situation I described. She hadn't known about the extent of his campaign against me. The idea that he could be so utterly ruthless, so calculated, chilled her. She hadn't just been dating a married man. She'd been involved with a predator. And he had lied to her, too.
About me.
about my work, about why our marriage was ending. He'd painted me as cold, ambitious, unstable, everything he was projecting onto me. Sarah didn't become my friend. Not in a conventional sense. But she became something equally powerful, an ally forged in shared betrayal. She was angry, not at me, but at Mark. At being lied to, manipulated, used. She had information. Private conversations. Texts. Emails. Things he'd told her about me, about his plans, things he'd shared because he thought she was safely in his pocket, another person he controlled. Information that proved unequivocally that he was behind the smear campaign. Information that revealed his motives, something related to his own professional standing, a scandal he was trying to preemptively bury by creating a bigger, more public scandal around me. His cancellation of me was a smokescreen for his own potential downfall. The turning point was confirmed. I wasn't just fighting Mark, I was fighting him with his own secrets, handed to me by the very woman he was trying to protect or control. The irony was a bitter tonic. He thought he could use his affair as a shield, a reason for our split that cast him as the slightly rogue but ultimately understandable figure, while I was the unstable wife whose career imploded. He never in a million years expected the mistress to join forces with the wife. He never saw that coming. He was so focused on managing his external narrative, on controlling me, that he failed to see the person right beside him clearly. Sarah wasn't just information. She was the blind spot in his carefully constructed world. We worked quickly, quietly. Sarah provided the evidence. Timestamps, specific phrases only Mark would use, details that corroborated the timeline of the online attacks. It wasn't just texts confessing his involvement. It was also glimpses into the secrets he was trying to hide, secrets that were far more damaging to his reputation than anything he'd accused me of. He hadn't just been having an affair. He was involved in something illegal, something that could cost him everything. His desperation to silence me wasn't about protecting his marriage or even the affair. It was about protecting himself from prison. The climax wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic courtroom scene. It was colder, more precise. I chose the setting carefully. A high-profile industry event Mark was attending, surrounded by his peers, the very people whose opinion he valued above all else. My reputation was damaged, but not entirely destroyed. There were still people who remembered my work, who valued my integrity. And they were watching. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout. I approached him calmly, a small, cold smile on my face. He saw me coming, his expression shifting from confident bonhomie to startled alarm. He clearly hadn't expected me there, hadn't expected me to have the strength to show my face. He tried to usher me aside, to control the situation. "Not now," he muttered, his voice tight. "We can discuss this privately." "There's nothing left to discuss privately, Mark," I said, my voice low but clear, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Not after everything you've done." His eyes darted around nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been trying to help you. You're unwell." The word unwell hung in the air. His favorite weapon. Discredit the source by claiming they're crazy. Dry humor touched my lips. Am I, Mark? Am I unwell? Is that why my career is collapsing? Because I'm unwell? Or because you decided to systematically destroy me to hide your own crimes? His face drained of color. People nearby stopped talking, their attention drawn to the quiet intensity of the exchange. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "No," I said, meeting his terrified gaze. "I don't think I will. Not after you orchestrated a public cancellation based on lies. Not after you used your own wife as a scapegoat for your illegal activities." I held up my phone. On the screen were snippets of the messages Sarah had sent me, projected onto a shared network screen, just enough to show context, names, dates, and the undeniable proof of his orchestration. He hadn't just admitted to the smear campaign, he'd revealed the reason. The details of the illegal dealings were hidden for now, but the proof of his malicious intent towards me, coupled with hints of deeper corruption, was undeniable. His eyes widened, his jaw dropping. He looked from my phone to the faces staring at him, then back to me, pure, unadulterated panic seizing him. He stammered, trying to find words, but none came. The silence in the small group surrounding us was deafening. He was blindsided. Utterly and completely blindsided. He never imagined Sarah would betray him. He never imagined I would be capable of finding out, let alone using it against him so publicly. The mask of control shattered, revealing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. "Sarah," he whispered, the name a strangled sound, full of disbelief and horror. "Yes, Mark," I said, the cold satisfaction spreading through me. "Sarah." It turns out she didn't like being lied to either. Funny how that works. The room seemed to tilt. The whispers started again, but this time they weren't about me. They were about him. His face was a mask of pure, screaming agony, silent but potent. He had tried to bury me, but instead, he had buried himself, hoisted by his own petard, delivered by the hand of his mistress turned unexpected fan. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Mark. The exposure at the event was just the beginning. With the initial proof I presented, coupled with a subsequent release of more detailed evidence from Sarah that implicated him in serious financial crimes, his world imploded. Investigations were launched. Clients dropped him overnight. His company initiated proceedings. The very people whose respect he craved turned their backs on him. The cancellation he'd planned for me became his own reality, amplified 1,000-fold by the scale of his crimes and the public nature of his exposure. There were rumors of legal action, of ruin, of his carefully constructed life crumbling into dust. For me, the path was longer, harder, but paved with a quiet sense of vindication. The online narrative didn't reverse overnight, but the truth had a way of seeping in. People started questioning the initial attacks, connecting them to Mark's downfall. The colleagues who had distanced themselves started reaching out, hesitant at first, then apologetic. Some of my clients returned, cautiously, willing to give me a second chance. The damage to my reputation was real, a scar I would carry, but it wasn't fatal. I wasn't a fraud. I was a survivor. My relationship with Sarah remained unique. We weren't friends. The circumstances of our connection were too painful, too complex for easy camaraderie. But there was a mutual respect, a shared understanding of the man who had tried to use us both. We exchanged messages occasionally, checking in, sharing updates on Mark's escalating misfortune. It wasn't about gloating, not really. More about the quiet satisfaction of seeing a predator face consequences. She moved on with her life, pursuing her art, seeking the authenticity Mark had tried to crush out of her. I focused on rebuilding mine. The loft apartment felt different, haunted by the ghosts of the lies that had lived within its walls. I sold it, moved to a smaller place, one that felt like mine, unburdened by his presence or his secrets. The process of rebuilding was slow, painstaking. There were days when the anger simmered, days when the sadness threatened to overwhelm me, days when the dry humor was the only thing that kept me afloat. I learned to trust my instincts again, the ones I had silenced for too long in the name of comfort and convenience. I learned that my strength wasn't in the external validation of my career or my marriage, but in the quiet resilience I found within myself. The painting of my life is different now. The frame is gone, revealed to be rotten wood all along. The colors are perhaps less vibrant, marked by the fire I walked through. But it's a truer painting. Honest. Resilient. I look at the scars on the canvas and see not damage, but history.
Proof that I survived.
That I fought back. That even when everything seemed lost, even when my own husband tried to erase me, I found an unlikely ally and stood my ground. The world still feels a little colder sometimes, knowing the depth of the betrayal. But the quiet warmth of my own integrity, of having faced the darkness and walked through it, keeps the deepest chill at bay. I wasn't canceled. I was forged. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.